everybody. Thank you for joining from all corners of the world. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce you all to Raphael, after which we'll dive into a structured discussion for the first 40 to 45 minutes of the hour. During this time, as always, please add your questions for Raphael in chat and upvote the questions you'd like me to really get to. We'll reserve the last 15 or so minutes for you to ask the most upvoted questions as I try to get to as many questions as possible. So, Raphael is the co-founder and former CEO of Jumia. Jumia is the largest online retailer in Africa, the largest one in Africa and the first African unicorn listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Raphael is also the co-founder and former CEO of Supermart.ng, the leading grocery delivery service in Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, he's the co-founder and CEO of Kiosk.app, ranked on the Financial Times 2024 list for one of Africa's fastest growing companies. A seasoned leader and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in the internet, financial services, and retail industries, Raphael has a passion for technology-led businesses in Africa that create value for customers, partners, and communities. With a strong educational background in computer science, electrical engineering, marketing, and business administration, Raphael holds degrees from Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and Stanford Seed. Raphael is dedicated to expanding digital-first solutions across the continent of Africa and bringing about change in Africa's retail sectors. Kiosk.app provides small retail businesses with access to top-notch products, services, and financing through a mobile app and a network of local partners. By empowering these businesses, Raphael aims to drive economic growth and enhance livelihoods within African communities. His work and achievements have been recognized by Business Day, Forbes Africa, and the World Retail Awards. Now, Raphael and I were in the same year at Harvard Business School, and we both were on a panel together at HBS just last month, where I got to hear his incredible story firsthand. I'm thrilled that he could join us today to share his story now with you all. Raphael, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me, my man.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so to get us started, Raphael, I wonder if you have a favorite expression or a saying that you could share with us.
Yeah, so I found myself thinking quite a bit about this. I lived for 10 years in Nigeria, right after business school. And one of the sayings that I took away from that community, the Yoruba people of Nigeria have a saying that 20 children cannot play together for 20 years. And I found that's to be a phrase I use very often, because when you go out there building teams, at a certain point, somebody will come across a new opportunity, and for some reason, they have to go out there and pursue something that is more in line with their personal ambitions. And the way I normally calm everybody down is to remind them of the fact that indeed 20 children cannot play together for 20 years. And so, people go their own separate ways. But I also like to tie that to the second thing, which is my wife is an ex-PwC alumnus, so PwC trained CFO. And I remind them of the fact that ever since she left PwC, she's given about maybe 75% plus of her gigs back to PwC, so audit gigs, etc. So when people walk into your life and at a certain point they have to leave the team, they remain ambassadors of the team. So it's not like, the world has come to an end and the 20 children cannot play for 20 years together. And at a certain point, we have to go our separate ways, but we can remain alumni and friends.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, speaking of children, could you share a bit more about your early childhood and upbringing with us? What values specifically were important in your household?
So I think I come from a very middle income. Well, I would say, but for depreciation of the local currency against much stronger currencies in the world, I would have come from an upper middle class society or family. right? Because my mom had a very good job, my dad too, but I grew up more with my mom. But I think because the local currency kept depreciating, so we sort of went from what would be an upper middle class family to something closer to lower middle class family upbringing. But I think the key thing there was it was instilled in us very quickly that through hard work, you can achieve just about anything you want, right? So I never at any point felt like I was disadvantaged. I always knew I would be able to reach any height that I wanted to reach, so long as I put in the effort. It was also instilled in us that we needed to take education very, very seriously because it was always going to be the best leveler. So if you had good education and you coupled it with hard work, then you could really practically achieve everything you wanted, right? I think a good case in point is Sundar of Google, who comes from, if you will, a similar background and, made it to the top of arguably one of the biggest companies in the world through hard work and education, right? So that's another one is empathy. Really just try and put yourself in the shoes of the person you're relating with, right? And I think that's one thing I like to teach more than you leaders. I found myself having a very good, interesting conversation with my wife yesterday. She's a fellow professional, a CFO, so you get a sense of the kind of conversations we have even on our date nights, right? And when you factor in things like empathy, and the conversation had to do with something along the lines of somebody making some part of the transportation, the money he's being paid to use for transportation. And I try to put it in the context of how much he's being paid to use for transportation, to use for Uber, but the guy was preferring to use the public transport and keep the change, right? And I had to put in the context of how much the person's salary is. And if we don't, when we empathize, when we put ourselves in the shoes of that runner in the office, whose salary is just maybe like, 20 times what he could actually save by taking public transport instead of using the money for Uber, it becomes much more easy to understand why they make the choices they make. Because it's very easy to just say, look here, fire the person, get a new one, but maybe we, the leaders, are part of the problem, right? But if we could actually empathize and put ourselves in the person's shoes, it becomes sort of easier to understand, right? So we can then, for example, design better incentive schemes that work better, right? So you don't have to take Uber, just make your way back to the office by 5:30 p.m. and you can keep the change. You know what I mean? Then we have win-win kind of scenarios. So yeah, those are the kind of, and then contentment and the value of family and friends. So contentment with what I have, right? Not really yearning too much for what I don't have, so that I can sort of enjoy what I have instead of constantly be caught in the rat race is one. And just really being close to the people that I grew up with. So both in terms of family and friends, that keeps me also grounded, right? So those are the values I'd say I picked up growing up in my family.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And what inspired you then to become an entrepreneur?
So I think I'm a natural leader, to be quite honest. I am, so whatever I do and wherever I found myself, I have found myself leading, right? The only times I don't lead is if there is somebody else who's leading, then I sort of play the role of an active follower, and I'm happy to do that. But whenever I find myself in a society that can be moved from A to B, I happily take on that role. And that's already always played out in my life. So when I was choosing what I'll do for a living, I found this framework which said you look for something that you're passionate about, that you're naturally good at, and where the economics can actually sustain the livelihood that you want to sustain, right? And so for me, I'm incredibly passionate about leadership. I'm incredibly passionate about the continent of Africa. I'm passionate about technology. I have a bachelor's and a master's in computer science. And and I'm passionate about business as a tool for creating value and distributing value. So I sort of tied all of those together, and I realized that entrepreneurship was what it was going to be for me. I could also imagine myself in a company and scaling. I say all the time, there's sort of two types of entrepreneurs: the one who starts a company and the one who scales stuff, right? I've tried to be a bit of both. But yeah, I chose something that played to my strength, that I'm incredibly passionate about. people ask me if I could do what I'm doing now on another continent. I suspect not, because I need to have that passion for Africa to be able to put in the grind the way I put in, etc. So I chose something that really I'm passionate about, and I'm happy with the economics of, and it makes me live the life I want to live. And yeah, if it makes $1 billion, so be it. If it doesn't, it doesn't really matter too much, because I'm really having a lot of fun doing what I do anyway.
Wonderful. Now that's really, really powerful statements there. So you built the largest online retailer in Africa, the first African unicorn, now the fastest growing company. What are the biggest challenges that you've faced in scaling your businesses, and how did you overcome them?
It's incredible. I struggle to talk about challenges in the context of one being bigger than the other, right? The life of an entrepreneur is really one challenge after the other, right? So you just sort of accept that reality and then get on with it. And when you do accept that reality, things sort of just pale into insignificance, because no matter how difficult things get, and the longer I've been in this game of entrepreneurship, the more I'm confident that even though everything looks as gloomy as gloom can ever be, that there will be a bright day after. That, you know, in a couple of days, things will turn around. Sometimes all you need is time, right? But you have to keep executing, right? In a way, the way I'm answering the question is similar to the way I presume a marathoner will answer the question if you were to ask them, what was your most tiring race? You know what I mean? You get tired running a marathon, right? It just comes with the territory. One is not more tiring than the other. It's a marathon. You know what I mean? And that's entrepreneurship for you. So there isn't any particular challenge that I was saying was worse than the other. I guess sometimes it's more the immediate challenge that you're dealing with, that because over time you realize, you know, you figured it out, right? And it builds. I think the more important thing for a lot of us who want to go into entrepreneurship is to just build that resilience, that mindset, that understanding that this is not an easy road. It's a very rewarding one. It's a very fulfilling one, but expect to be rolling with the punches. I'm listening to this. I just listened to maybe about a quarter of it, about 10 minutes of it. But Aliko Dangote, the richest man in Africa, told his story, and it's fascinating to listen to think that a person of his incredible success still has to deal with things that, quite frankly, it will break me if I had to deal with what he's dealing with, right? So you can imagine the higher up you go, it probably just gets even tougher in terms of the size, the sheer weight of the challenges that you face. But with resilience and leaning in, you will overcome them, right? Just the same way I like to tell people, the duality is important to realize that, right? There's good, and good only exists because bad exists. You know what I mean? Happiness can only exist if sadness exists. Success can only exist if failure exists. You know what I mean? One cannot exist without the other. So you can't be optimizing for the better parts and not realizing that you'll have to deal with the other parts too. In the same vein, when you're facing challenges, realize that it's just a matter of time before you get some lucky breaks to you, right? It just comes with the territory.
Beautiful. Really, really wonderful advice. I love that. So slightly changing gears a little bit, how do you balance innovation with the day-to-day running of the practical operations and matters of your companies?
Oof. Yeah, so I think that's a difficult one. There are fundamental things that one has to do in an organization. You know what I mean? Buy low, sell high. You know what I mean? Collect early, pay late, right? So buy low, sell high, you manage for profitability. Collect early, pay late, you manage for cash flows, right? And I think the latter is even more important than the former, because if you run out of cash, it's kind of like, you know, a heart attack for the organization. When you're not profitable, you die a slow death. When you run out of cash, it's like a heart attack. So these are fundamental things. Execute very quickly, build a culture. All of these things are things that you can't do without in an organization. But I think when it comes to innovation, it's really important to be close to your customer, right? To be very close to your customer, talk to the customer, understand the customer. The more you talk to the customer, the more you get insights about solutions to the customer's problem, right? I saw this said somewhere, I can't quote paraphrase it, but it says something along the lines of, if you can walk in Joe Block's shoes, you can sell Joe Block's what Joe Blocks buys. You know, if you learn to walk in Joe Block's shoes, you'll be able to sell Joe Blocks what Joe Blocks buys. So it's very important to be close to your customer, just interact with them, and the innovative ideas will come. Then you need to put a structure in place so that whimsical ideas are not considered innovative ideas, right? Because everybody has an opinion in the room, but these are just hypotheses, right? So how do we make sure we don't waste organizational resources on hypothesis? It has to be backed by the fact that the customer was brought into the conversation. The customer has given us a reason to believe that if we build it, they will buy it. You know what I mean? And a very good litmus test is to ask the customer on a scale of 1 to 10, if they'll buy, or how they'll rate the product, how they'll, to tell others about the product. And apparently anything below 8, inclusive of 8, is just the customer being nice to you, right? If a customer says 9, then they're willing to actually evangelize about the product, but they have a bit of a concern. If they say 10, then that's it. You know what I mean? They can. And the second best is to just get them to pay for it, right? So it's a complex process, but I think if there was a red button that can be pressed to move the needle, it is to spend time with the customer.
Got it. So this is perfect. What you're sharing with us right now, our fellows in our current program and many of our alumni also completed this course on Empathize and Prototype. It's a design thinking course. So you shared the value of listening to your customer. And it sounds like, you do surveys. What other methods, or what are all the methods that you have found most vital to understanding the needs and gaps and pain points of customers?
Mm-hmm. So I mean, one is definitely to be in touch with the customer. Then the second one is, what we've done is we've come up with a process that is numbers based, that enables us to rapidly prototype, rapidly test what I like to call it the user journey. And so the concept of a user journey applies across everything in the company, right? So the user journey of an order, the user journey of a customer, the user journey of the delivery of an order, etc. And so when we, for example, need to improve something or need to innovate, we essentially start off by saying, what is the user journey here? Get the numbers to help us be able to make decisions. So you quickly get about 100 data points for every step in the user journey, and then track it and see where things are breaking. So think of it sort of like an e-commerce funnel, where you have 100 customers land on the website, and then you track and see how many of them actually logged in, what percentage of the ones who logged in actually added items to carts, what percentage of the items added to people who added items to carts went to the checkouts, what percentage of them actually went on and paid, what percentage of them received the product and did not return it, right? And so the focus then should be at all points on where things break the most. So if you have 100 people land, 90% log, let's say 90% log in successfully. Out of that 90%, added to carts, but only 40% of those actually converted from add to cart to payment. Then you focus all the energy of the organization on lifting that 40% to 90%. So and then we do this iteratively. So that way, and so you're doing this iteratively, but at the same time, you're talking to the customers. So if you have customers who did not add to carts, you're better off spending all the time to just call those customers to understand none of the other problems are worth solving. This is the only problem worth solving. And when you start thinking this way, it becomes easier to find the resources to focus on what you're solving. And then once you increase that number to whatever you're happy with, maybe it's 85 you're happy with, conversion rate, you go back to your funnel again and say, what is breaking the most? And if you keep optimizing on that, then things move in the right direction. And in the process, remember, at all points, you're optimizing on something, but at all points, you're also talking to the customer. So you start getting a lot of insights that was not in the room before, but by just talking to the customer very, very frequently and being focused on where we spend attention, we should be able to innovate better.
Yeah, wonderful. That reminds me of something you posted on LinkedIn recently. You said that individuals or organizations with too many priorities have no priorities. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Remember, an organization is such a complex thing. It's fascinating, right? How this thing, and I've been in this position a couple of times already, how this thing that it was just a concept in one's head takes form and then just becomes this very complex beast. You know what I mean? Like, and with many talented people from different backgrounds, with opinions, I like very strong personalities around me, right? So very strong personalities, opinionated, etc. As all of a sudden, things could move in all sorts of directions, right? So one of the most important jobs I've come to find is to keep my job as the CEO and also to teach everybody in the organization that innovation is almost, I think Steve Jobs said it, but I'm not going to paraphrase it. It's not what you do, it's what you don't do. You know what I mean? Like, what are the many things that we think are right that we have to say no to because we have to focus? You know what I mean? Because what happens otherwise, you start chasing like 9 rabbits. There's this African proverb that says, if you want to have rabbits for lunch and you have 9 rabbits, focus on one. You know what I mean? Because if we chase all of them, we're not going to have lunch. You know what I mean? So because you have so many different people with very good intent and very good ideas, etc., you can spread yourself very, very thin. So I think one of the most important lessons that we don't talk about much, I think Steve Jobs was a genius. We need to pay attention to him. And there are lots of good old YouTube videos of him, not just snippets, but interviews that he did, etc. There's one very good one that I recommend called The Lost Interview. It's on YouTube, but it has to be paid for. I think it's also on Amazon Prime, etc. But it's really gem, it's a gem, right? And one of the lessons he taught, and we saw it when he went back to Apple, he stopped the organization from doing all the other things they were doing. And at all points in time, they focused on one thing and did it very well. And they were able to just to change one industry to the next industry and to the next industry. That's done only through focus. So yeah. And John Ive, who used to be his designer, had a quote, I think you'll find it somewhere on the internet, where essentially saying no to things is not just about saying no to things that you conveniently say no to. You have to say no to things that you're painfully saying no to. That's how you focus on an organization. Otherwise, we spread the organization's resources too thin and we decrease its chances of succeeding.
Wonderful. Great. And then keeping with the theme of empathizing and prototype, were there any aha moments for you that you experienced in identifying any gaps or the target markets for Jumia or Supermart.ng or Kiosk.app?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, obviously, there have been many aha moments, but I think the key lesson from my career in building these three companies is focus, right? Because essentially, I've been trying to crack retail distribution on the continent of Africa for the last 12, 13 years, right? And what I'm realizing is that the more I look at the problem, the more I understand the problem, right? I just had a call, just my last call now was with one of the biggest retailers on the continent, CEO of one of the biggest retailers on the continent. And I explained to him, look, I've been looking, I understand why you've had to withdraw from some of the markets that you've been in, because I've tried, and incidentally, he's talking about doing e-commerce. And I was like, no, that's a non-starter, right? Because I've looked at the same problem for so long from different angles, and I'm getting to understand the African consumer better and better and better. So the aha moment is multiple aha moments of just trying to just getting to understand this customer better and better. And the reason why I think it's worth it for me. Maybe there are some people who try one thing and move on to the next one, which is okay. But I think we have a continent of 1.4 billion people. And if one is able to crack it, right, and understand the customer and then one can be able to sell just about anything to them. But they're incredibly difficult to understand because the continent is significantly lower income people. Some of them are not exposed to technology. Some of them are not exactly reachable by formal structures. In some cases, even government structures don't reach some of the nooks and crannies that they have to reach. But the reason why we're building Kiosk is the lesson that every African consumer has a local kiosk somewhere about 100 meters away from them, right? So the end goal of Kiosk as an organization is to use technology through these mom and pop shops to not be able to reach this 1.4 billion people. We tried with Jumia. In retrospect, I realized the proposition was just for the upper part of the socioeconomic pyramid. We tried with Supermart. I learned another lesson about, disposable incomes and, people placing a premium on their time, etc. And through all of that, I realized that the majority of the continent is lower down the socioeconomic pyramid. Hence the proposition that if we actually innovate through the mom and pop shops, we can actually reach the majority, the 70% of purchasing power, and then we can do all sorts of other interesting things through them. So the aha moment is the fact that I've stayed looking at the same problem long enough to form thoughts that I would not have been able to form 10 years ago under any circumstance.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, our fellows are also taking a course on the power of stories. And I wanted to ask you whether storytelling has played a role in your success as an entrepreneur.
Unfortunately, no. I didn't have as much of an appreciation for the power of stories in my journey. So I sort of have played to my strengths, right? But I would say now I do. One of the things that I intend to do with Kiosk is really to focus on that, right? So even my head of marketing and communication tried to sort of get us to move in that direction more. But now that I know that I stopped her from doing so, I just was a bit blind to the amplifying power of a good story to what we're doing, right? But I'm conscious of it now and I need to put more effort into it.
Got it.
Yeah, so what I've built up until now is just get out there, get a good product out there and believe that the product can sell itself. But I'm appreciative more and more now, about the pulling power of a good story behind what you're doing. And I think our story is good. We just need to learn to tell it. And some of these things, when the CEO, when the leader of the organization doesn't appreciate something, it sometimes is very difficult for anyone else to be able to get the resources, if you know what I mean, right? But now I do appreciate it and I think we'll do a better job going forward.
No, I appreciate that. Great. Now I want to ask you a few questions around leadership and social impact. So many high impact individuals and entrepreneurs, they burn the candle at both ends to achieve everything that they've set out to achieve. What has been the role of mental health in your journey? What have you learned in terms of balance, prioritization, or self-care in the marathon of your entrepreneurial path?
Yeah, I think if I have a blind spot in storytelling, I'll say mental health is an even bigger blind spot of mine, right? It's so much so that I literally even have to tell my colleagues in leadership that, look here, this is not my strength. So you guys need to pay attention here because I'm just a hard-driven guy who will keep pushing, right? And it's important you understand this is not my forte. You need to stop me when need be for me to pay attention there. Not so much on an individual level, but more from an organizational level. Because I guess it's I'm sound. I don't know what the right phrasing is. So I would say I'm very grounded. Right. I mean, I still, when I'm back in Ghana, I'm still the one in the kitchen washing dishes for my mom. You know what I mean? Sweeping the floor, etc. That's the kind of background I come from. When even at home, when the house help is gone for the weekend, I do all of those things right at home. So what it also means is that I hardly feel the pressure of the job, right? Because my identity is not at all tied with the companies that I build. You know what I mean? So it puts less and less pressure. I have a very good, solid network of friends, both at home in Ghana, very strong relationship with my wife and the children, all of these things. So I don't feel the weight as much. You know what I mean? And maybe some of these choices, which come natural to me, then also fortify things like my mental strength, etc. So that's why, for example, I can be hard charging, driving, and that's okay. But yeah, what it means for me as a leader then is that I literally need to remind my colleagues. Luckily for me, I have an organizational structure where about 50% of the leadership team is female. So very good balance in there, right? We have Caucasians, we have Africans, we have Arabs, you know, so we have a very good balance in there. And I just laid out to guys, these are not my strengths. So if you guys notice something, you just need to pull my ear and say, guys, let's slow down, let's pay attention to this, etc. But yeah, I wouldn't say I can't comment much on it because it's not something I would say I'm well versed in.
Yeah, yeah. But I really love the awareness that you share with your team to say, hey, this is not my forte, and you all have to watch out for this. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And what would you say are the most important leadership qualities for driving innovation with limited resources and to bring about social impact?
Yeah, I would say two I've talked about already. One is empathy, right? Extreme empathy is important. Two is focus. When you have limited resources, quite frankly, just focus on where you add value the most. And social change, I think I'll answer the question even in the context of social change, still within the context of empathy. And I speak from the perspective, so from my operating environment, right? So by the time you are in an organization like mine, then you're already middle class plus, you know what I mean? And if on top of that, you've gone to school abroad, etc., then you're more upper middle class, etc. A lot of the social impact stuff is happening lower down the socioeconomic pyramid. So the question really becomes, are you able to empathize with the person you're trying to create change for, right? Will you feel comfortable going into those communities? And one of the first things we did, and this was even in the COVID times, and we just put on our masks, etc. First 2020 Christmas, we went into the communities, into Kibera, for folk who know Kenya. And yeah, we were out there distributing flour to the people, and all the way to midnight. Now, people would have told you before that you can't go into that community, but all we needed to do was to talk to one of our colleagues who grew up in that community and sort of knows the community and said, look, I can make sure we get there, we'll be fine, nothing will happen. While they're just distributing flour, maize flour for food to people, etc. It taught us to appreciate the people, because a significant part of our volumes also are coming from those kind of communities, right? So how do we build a business where essentially we're enabling these communities get access to food products where they're paying market prices, by the way, but we are detached from them because we go live in our high rises elsewhere, right? The only way to do that is actually to go there and humanize the people and talk to them, and it makes a big difference in being able to build a business. So that's one of the most important things that I insist on. And I know companies where the executives are scared to go into some of the communities they're trying to generate, if you will, revenue for make change in, right? So I think empathy and being able to relate with the person on the receiving end of your offering is probably it for me.
Wonderful. I see there's a lot of really great questions in chat, so we'll get to the chat questions in just a moment. My last question to you, Raphael, is how do you define success for yourself, and has that shifted over time?
I wouldn't say so. I think for me, success in the work environment, I think for the work environment, I'm probably just driven, right? I see things that I want changed, I think we should be able to build e-commerce in Africa. So I grabbed the bull by the horn and tried to do that. I really believe that we can turn the mom and pop shops into the practical, physical, and digital post office branches to enable, products and services get to all the nooks and crannies of Africa, to enable digital services, to enable other types of services, medical services, financial services. The mom and pop shop can become a local bank branch where people can put their savings in. One of the things that I want to do, for example, is to enable the mom and pop shop to sell insurance products in the community. So insurance, for example, is a $200 annual premium product. That's the minimum they want to sell. People in these communities, the lower income, cannot afford this, right? But with a technology like mine and a mom and pop shop who's close to them, that can be divvied down into a $25 payment a month. That creates, by the end of the year, it's a $300 payment. $25 can be $1 a day paid by the guy, but they get insured for all the things. It's health, it's property, it's, education, all those things that the people up higher up the socioeconomic pyramid desire can be given to the people lower down the socioeconomic pyramid, and it accelerates their way up. So those are the things that make me build what I want to build. But for me, successfully building it by itself doesn't make me feel successful as a human being. When it's all said and done, I think my most important source of validation is, my relationship with my children, my wife, my mom, my family, and my friends. That's I don't know how to express it. It's almost like what I'll still be left with if everything was to fall apart. You know what I mean? For me, it's the bigger definition of success. And maybe it's also the reason why I never really feel a lot of the pressure of the world on my shoulder, because really everything that will make me feel successful, I already, if you will, have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, we're going to open it up to questions. I'm going to go bottom up from chat. And so if you have a question, please put it in chat and I will invite you to ask that question. So the first question goes to Alejandro from Colombia, our alum.
Hello, good morning, Humaima and Juan family. And thank you, Raphael, for your insights. My question is the following. You have empathized to us to focus on have a good product, but I want to know what are the criteria, metrics you use to define that you are focusing on creating a good product. Thank you so much, Raphael.
That's a tough one, Alejandro. So for product, I see 4 matrices that are important to keep in mind, right? A good product has to solve for all these 4 risks, okay? One is viability, one is usability, one is value, and one is feasibility. So the way we work in Kiosk is we have what we call a squad, and the squad has, I'm speaking specifically from a technology product perspective. I'm sorry, that's what I do. So a squad is a group of people, a multidimensional, multifunctional group of people who work on a problem. And for every such problem they're solving, they must solve for the value. Value is that the customer is willing to pay a certain amount that will make Kiosk make money, and the customer will be happy to continue paying the amount, right? And Kiosk should be able to make and take care of it. So we should be able to build a business out of that. Usability is that the customer should be able to use the product without anybody being there to teach the customer, etc. So if you build a good product and the customer is not using it, then it's not a good product. And for me, those are 2 tasks that are the responsibility of the product manager. Then there is, usability is the product responsibility of the user interface designer. There is feasibility, which is the responsibility of the engineer. So the idea should be buildable. And then viability is that it's also the responsibility of the product manager, where essentially if there are any regulatory requirements, etc., all of those should be built in. So once you solve for these risks and you have the customer using it and grow into your matrices, then I think you've built yourself a good product. But the key thing is to start the conversation knowing that you have to solve for these risks. Because I've seen one too many, and even as far back as in Supermart, we would make this mistake where we go out and build a product, but we hadn't actually solved for these risks. So you only discover that you haven't solved for the risk at the end when a lot of company resources have been wasted on building the product. But when you start off knowing that there are 4 things that the product must satisfy, right? Usability, feasibility, value, and viability. Where usability is that the customer will use it, feasibility is that engineering can build it, value is that the company will make money, and viability is that it will pass all regulatory and all other such requirements. Then you're less likely to build a product that fails at the end of the process. I hope that's answered your question, Alejandro.
Great, wonderful. All right, let's go to Ghazafistan Almaty and Sarek. Let's ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So my question is, what should be considered when expanding the company across multiple countries that located in one similar region, and how can the barriers specific to each country can be addressed effectively? Thank you.
Yeah. Eric, yeah, I've lived a life like that, so I can tell you from first-hand experience. So with Kiosk, we spent 2020, the year 2020, we started practically in 2020, spent it only in Nairobi, building in Kenya, Nairobi. The lesson I learned, I'd lived in Nigeria for the first 10 years after business school, and then moved to Kenya. The first lesson I learned was that even though, I mean, you would think that Kenyans and Nigerians are all Africans, English, Anglophone Africans, etc. So they're the same people. Very wrong, right? I mean, the first year, we had a fraud in the company where we lost over we lost about $250,000, right, in the company, because I totally thought the Kenyan, when I was looking at the Kenyan, I thought, I sort of used what I had learned about Nigerians to sort of as the frame of reading Kenyans, and I got it wrong. We lost quite a bit of money. So that's one. People from 2 different countries just exhibit different. They're all the human attributes, but at the same time, there's also cultural stuff you have to keep in mind. Then the second was we spent 2021 expanding to 19 locations in Kenya. That was a bit of a breeze because, once we fixed the issues and tightened up our processes in 2020, expanding to 19 locations in Kenya was a breeze. 2022, we expanded to Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria. And again, new lessons to be learned. One, getting the right people to come on board to run the business can be a problem. I got some right, I got some wrong. Some I found out much earlier, some I found out much later. And then you also have things like the local environment. So what I did that I think we did right is we allowed quite a bit of latitude in terms of localization of the service, the product in the countries, right? And that was 2022, we rolled out. 2023, we expanded the business. I found things out that I never expected. So Uganda, which is a relatively small country, outperformed countries like Tanzania and Nigeria, which were bigger countries. You know what I mean? Because the leadership in Uganda was actually good. So you find out very quickly, if you get the right person, it makes a big difference. In retrospect, what would I do? I probably would have built out the leadership in Kenya, right? And then, so for example, bring a Ugandan to Kenya to join Kiosk early on, bring a Nigerian to join Kiosk early on, bring a Tanzanian early on. So when the time comes for international expansion, they go back when I'll know things like the content of their character, etc., than, recruiting a new GM, because we're growing extremely fast. Like Umema said, over the last 3 years, we're the second fastest growing company on the continent of Africa, according to the Financial Times. So we're growing very, very fast, which also means that sometimes you don't have the human resource and we have to recruit people. I got some people on board who had integrity questions I had to part ways with. So I think one of the key things in terms of lessons is the most important thing in an organization is the people, right? And I would say try and get that right, but understand and appreciate the fact that you get some wrong. And when you realize that you've gotten it wrong, do not hesitate in making the difficult choices. You know what I mean? Not only does it send signals, right, but the rot that a leader creates in an organization is way deeper and it takes way longer to clean up. So you don't want to wait over time to do that. Otherwise, yeah, it's a conflict between speed of execution alongside with the mistakes that come with it versus being careful. In retrospect, I'll still move very fast and clean things up after. Because some of the lessons you won't learn unless you've stumbled a bit into mistakes there, right? I know people who build with their network of people they've built with. I don't know why, but I just find myself starting everything from scratch and, getting new people on board, etc. I thought lately about it that maybe I should actually go back. I just don't know why. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to go bother, somebody who's moved on and is doing something else somewhere. Hey, let's go start a company together kind of thing. Maybe that's an approach to get the right people on board faster. So I'm also a work in progress, right? So I look at myself and ask myself, what can I do differently to make sure that I get better results next time around, etc. But the people part is it. And I'll say, yeah, I'll still defer to moving very quickly, making mistakes and correcting the mistakes after.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Now we're going to go to Uganda now, and I'm going to invite Kenneth to ask his question.
Yes, thank you so much for this very nice talk. My question was on how you've gone about building a great tech team, and whether you found that this expertise was readily available, and the other was on 5 books you would recommend if you had to.
So the problem with technology is techies are technical experts, right? But and almost like individual producers. But then at a certain point, they have to transition from being individual producers to becoming managers and leaders, right? That, in my opinion, is what is broken about technology, not only in Africa, I think everywhere around the world. So it's easy to get good techies in the beginning. It's just difficult to build a big enough organization. So what I found myself doing is I literally had to become the director of engineering myself. At a certain point, I wasn't happy with the CTO. The founding CTO became the head of architecture and VP architecture and engineering, which is good. Brought on board a new CTO. I wasn't happy, so I ended up taking on the CTO role myself. So essentially, I function as a CEO, CTO. And then I needed to go one step lower to take on the role of director of engineering, so I can interact very closely with the engineering managers to one, get them to appreciate the role of management. Because for the longest time, I kept asking them, if you want to become a better engineering manager, do you need more management or do you need more engineering? And your typical engineer will tell you they need more engineering because that's where they came from. That's the tool that has taught them success, that brought them success. But really, to build a big organization, what you need is more management. So I found myself now going in there, instilling more and more management discipline in them. And then when they see that it's working, and I'll give you an example. Somebody comes and says that a feature can be developed only in, they'll finish the feature in 6 weeks, right? In 3 sprints. And I'm like, no, you should be able to finish this in 1 sprint. And we go back and forth. And at the end of the exchange, they realize indeed they've been able to finish it in 1 sprint because of the way they just changed things that managers do to get things done that engineers don't have an appreciation for, not because they're not good, but because they're not appreciating the role of management. So for me, I think if you want to build an engineering organization, it's easy to find the engineers. It's more difficult to find engineering managers and leaders. And it's also easier, contrary to what everybody will tell you, or most people will tell you, it is actually much easier to take a person who has an appreciation for management to go into engineering and lead engineering than it is to take an engineer to become an engineering manager. So default on a good leader / manager to go in there, because some part of management is also to build not just the connection with the engineers, but the respect that they trust you, that you can manage and lead them. I think a good manager should be able to do that. If you marry that with engineering, then we should be able to build more engineering organizations.
Great. Raphael, do you want to take the second question as well? Any books that you might recommend?
Oh, books that I recommend, quite a few. I do like The 7 Habits. It's a classic. It really worked for me very well. I do like The Psychology of Money, because I think we all have our own money stories. And I feel sometimes a lot of the pressure we put on ourselves is because we think we need to keep amassing more and more, and we keep thinking that we're not. So I think that's a very good book to read. High Output Management is another one for building organizations. High Output Management, what other tool would I recommend? Let me think. I'll just think while we're talking, and I'll add the other two quickly. But I really believe in the power of books. And maybe, Umama, I can send you a list later that you can share with the team. I really believe in the power of books, because by the time somebody's taking time to write a book, so there's some crap books out there, but they're very, very good books that we can learn from out there too.
Yeah, no, please do send that, and we will share with the full global community. Wonderful. Next question in Kyrgyzstan, Bekaim, our alum from data science.
Thank you so much for this Zoom meeting and for sharing your journey. It is like really motivational. And my question is like, how important has mentorship and networking been in your career journey, in your entrepreneurial journey, and what advice you can give us? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think mentorship is very important. I don't know so much about networking. Networking hasn't been that important for me, but mentorship has, right? So mentorship has finding people who've walked the journey, who one can talk to, who one can relate to. Sometimes you hear their stories and you're like, wow, what I'm dealing with, I should be able to deal with this, because people are dealing with bigger things. You know what I mean? And then I also have, people that I do call when I have really big problems to solve that sometimes. And it's quite fascinating how you call someone with something that you've been grappling with for the longest time, and the person is just able to unpack it because they've got more experience. You know what I mean? So what I would say is I find the people who I admire and I keep them close, right? And just keep a conversation going on, checking in every now and telling them about what I need, etc. Because what that also does is it gives them enough context. But yeah, for me, mentorship has been very important, because even the most difficult problems, you call a mentor and, within a second or two, within a minute or two, they've unpacked it, and it makes a big difference. In terms of networking, yeah, maybe it's a weakness of mine. And remember, even way back in business school, it just didn't work for me. When folk had, those networking events, etc. Yeah. I'd go there with business cards and I'll leave with the business cards, and if I did connect any business cards, I'll just go drop them somewhere. I just didn't do a good job of following up. I think it's just an alien, and it's just a concept that I've struggled to appreciate. But mentorship, I totally live by.
Yeah, those were very awkward networking sessions sometimes. All right, final question. Time flew by. Our final question is going to go to Brazil, to our very own Linda Fraga, for our MBA alum.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Raphael, for joining us today and sharing your insights. So you mentioned the importance of knowing when to step up as a leader. And I wanted to ask you, from your experience, what signs do you look for to know when is the right time to transition from being an active follower to taking on a leadership role?
Wolves. That's another tough one. Latin America is coming at me hard today, right? So when I said what I said it in the context of a society that needs someone to lead. And if I feel like, so for example, if there is a fire in the neighborhood now, right? I go there. If I see you're leading, you're coordinating everyone, I'm going to be like, what do you need me to do? You know what I mean? And when I have an idea of what needs to be done, I'll come to you and say, look, I think we need to pay attention here. If on the other hand, I walk there and I see nobody's in charge, I'm going to be the one calming everyone down, etc. That's what I meant in that context. In the context of an organization, because the roles are very clearly defined, then, but what I also do know is that whenever I'm able to replace myself, I'm able to add more value within the organization. So if, for example, I'm able to find someone in Kiosk that takes on the CEO role, I know Kiosk will be all the better for it because I'm going to take on something else. I don't know if it's called chairman or it's like, senior CEO, whatever it is called. I am 100% sure in that new capacity, I'll be able to grow Kiosk faster because my headspace will be freed up to be able to come up with new ideas or think about new things that will be able to move the company forward. Not sure if that answers your question, Linda.
It does. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, with that, Raphael, thank you so much for your time. Those were just incredible gems of wisdom and wonderful insights. I really appreciate your honesty and just really wonderful perspective. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for your great questions. Thank you, alumni, for joining. Thank you, our current fellows. Lovely to see you all, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.